Welcome back, everybody. So now we're going to move into our third section of today, which is our land management section. So we're going to be hearing from three different people who were all part of our level 3 local working groups workshops. And so they're going to be sharing different perspectives on how they chose to prioritize their areas. What are some of the successes they've had? What are some of the challenges that they've had since these workshops? And so first, we're going to hear from Sarah in the Gunnison Basin. And what I'm going to have you guys do, it's going to be a little different in this section, is save your questions till the end. And if you have a specific question for a specific speaker, please put their name in parentheses just so I know who to direct the question to. And if it's for everyone, then just put everybody, just so we can kind of keep some semblance of order. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Sarah.
All right. And can you see the presentation?
Yes, but you're not in presentation mode.
Okay. Maybe
Yep.
it's a little...
There you go.
There we go. All
Yep.
right.
You're good.
Okay. All right. So my name's Sarah Elze. I'm the Cheatgrass and Habitat Restoration Coordinator in Gunnison County. And I'm here to talk to you about kind of where we've been and where we're going, and how my role has changed in this changing landscape. There we go. So cheatgrass is the only invasive annual grass that we have in Gunnison County at this time, although Japanese brome is not very far away. We hope it stays, but far away, but it's getting closer. Cheatgrass has been here at least 2 or 3 decades, maybe a little bit longer. And we are in a unique position because I would say that our infestation is relatively limited and isolated. So if you look at that picture, that's kind of what it looks like up here. Pretty small, isolated infestations. But if you talk to anyone who's been around for a while, I would say we're well past the early stages of infestation. It doesn't take much to find cheatgrass just about anywhere you go in the basin. But what we have going for us is a really strong perennial plant community that's just protecting us from those isolated patches getting connected. And I think the fear is that we're, one big disturbance away from those patches, meeting and soil opening up for, monocultures to potentially happen. So that's kind of where we are. We have a really engaged community. We've implemented most of the straightforward efforts. We've brought in the experts like the Imagine group. We had a big flush of money several years ago, have done some pretty large cross-boundary work. In the basin, we had a lot of money available to private landowners to do treatment on private land. And we are now at the point where we need to find a more sustainable way to continue to treat, and then also open up avenues for, more effective treatment methods. So I'm talking mostly about NEPA clearances because we're about 80% publicly owned in this basin. We are a really engaged community. So we have committees upon committees in Gunnison, which is wonderful. We have very engaged stakeholders, visitors even, and it's wonderful. But we need to take all that engagement and convert it not only into action, which we do have a lot of action on the ground, but we need to kind of move that into a sustained action. So build the infrastructure and mechanisms so that, treatment can go on even when things like government shutdowns happen or hiring freezes kind of stymie experts on the ground. So that's one thing I'm really working towards, is moving into that mechanism building phase. So we're at a point in Gunnison where we are still able to do cost-effective treatments. We don't have any large-scale monocultures that require massive reseeding, or even worse, just containment. We can treat most of what we have, but we are limited by capacity and funding. And so I think we're in this stage where we need to reinvent how we're tackling cheatgrass in the basin. And my role in particular needs to kind of change a little bit in this changing landscape. Um, so we're all familiar with coarse sagebrush. If you take a look at Colorado down here, we don't have a ton of coarse sagebrush left, kind of in the north section. And then down here in Gunnison, we have quite a bit. So if you look at that kind of odd triangle shape, that's mostly where we work. So you're focused on the tan, that's coarse sagebrush, but the darker gray is occupied by the Gunnison sage grouse. That's a federally listed, listed as threatened species. That's really important for this area, not only because its intrinsic value, and we all enjoy listening to it, especially right now during Lex survey season, but also because we're aware that, if that population declines further, we could be facing that species moving into endangered listing, and that would really change how we use this landscape. And it's not the only species, so that's the Gunnison sage grouse up there in the corner, but we also have a lot of big game that helps build our tourism industry, for hunting especially, and that big game relies on that core sagebrush habitat here in the Gunnison Basin. And then, of course, that sagebrush ecosystem is important for our other big industry, beef cattle, which is keeping our private landowners as our stewards on the ground. So all that private land that we would like to stay with these folks who have been on the ground for decades, if not longer, we'd like to keep them on the ground and keep their stewardship efforts here in the valley. Like most of you, we're working on a patchwork, so you can kind of vaguely make out that same Gunnison Basin shape there of ownership, patchwork of ownership in this basin. So 80% of the basin is federally managed between the BLM Forest Service and then a little bit with the National Park Service and national recreation areas. There's a little bit of state land and wilderness. And then the rest would be private land. And so with that patchwork of ownership comes a lot of interesting different boundaries between land use and goals of that land use, as well as kind of what treatment options and treatment methods are available. So if you look at that map and you take something like indaziflam, for example, there's actually a very small proportion of coarse sagebrush that I can actually use indaziflam on in that map. So weaving together effective treatments is probably the hardest part of this job, so that we can, effectively manage cheatgrass and continue to move this needle forward. So how are we doing that? If we're all living in the same reality, we're facing a little bit of contraction of funding at the moment. So I want to focus on some of the treatment, or one of the treatments I'm working on. So if you're familiar with circuit ecology, it kind of focuses on these pinch points on the landscape. So often we're talking about where wildlife is moving, which is great, but I'm focusing on where potential cheatgrass is being vectored by wildlife, which is interesting given the last talk we just heard. So here we are in the Gunnison Basin, and this is the Centennial State Wildlife Area in this blue polygon. It's just north of Blue Mesa Reservoir and is a big access point to the West Elk Mountains, right? So, I don't have a ton of funding. And I certainly don't have a lot of resources. For example, like the BLM staff is extremely short right now. So how can we effectively treat areas right now? So I'm looking at this area, the Centennial State Wildlife Area, because it is one of these places, a pinch point on our landscape. So it's a very important overwintering ground for elk, particularly in harsh winters, so less so this past winter. It is an access point by way of this west road and drainage to cattle, to grazing allotments on Forest Service land, also a lot of hunting access and other recreation access in BLM and Forest Service. It's a shed hunting area, and on this east drainage here, By the way, I drew those blue lines. We do not have that much water in this area. But on that east drainage, it's really high quality brood rearing habitat for Gunnison sage grouse. So, you know, this represents all of those different industries and land uses and people and wildlife here in this Gunnison Basin. And it also has cheatgrass, but it has a wide range of cheatgrass. So across the Gunnison Basin, I would say there's probably nowhere that's greater than 25% cover, and that's pushing it. I would guess closer to 15% cover. So the context is very different relative to other places in the Mountain West. So when I say we have cheatgrass, there's a couple plants in this image. But here in this east drainage, it's near a lek, and I almost always flush females when I'm around this area. So in the fall of 25, we sprayed it with backpack sprayers. The cheatgrass was pretty limited, so it was really quite easy to put some indaziflam and imazapic on the ground after perennials had senesced. And I look forward to going back this spring sometime and checking it out, seeing how well we fared there. The other side of this wildlife area represents a completely different infestation. So this road here is open a lot more often and it's a lot more busy. So you can kind of see back there, that's the corral. So every early summer and in October, cattle are moving up and back out of those grazing allotments and Forest Service. There's a parking lot back here by the cottonwoods, and you can just see really degraded soils with not only cheatgrass, but several other noxious weeds. And so this represents, backpacks can't really handle this. So this represents an area where I'm pursuing funding to get a contract crew to come in here and demonstrate, because it's state land, what aerial spraying might be able to accomplish. And kind of show our federal and private partners and stakeholders, what aerial broadcast spraying, when the pilots are really well trained, can possibly accomplish with one application, maybe two. And the reason I think that this would be really important is because this kind of west-facing slope is just kind of getting out of hand. And I think it could be really interesting to show what that kind of application method can do on more rugged terrain. It doesn't look particularly steep, but it would be helpful here. So, we're all living in this contracted time a little bit, and I won't go on about that. But one thing I've had to do is kind of take a position. I've been in my position for about 15 months, so I wasn't in place when Petar Simic, who had it before, did the level 3 workshop. But what he was able to accomplish with a lot of funding early on looks a little different. I've mostly been focused on infrastructure building, which sounds a little dry, but I'm hoping that makes my position, and more importantly, the program of invasive annual grass management in the Gunnison Basin, more sustainable long term. So one of the things I've been working on is pushing back the strategic plan development, the big 100-page document, and working more on a framework that answers just a few questions and starts these important conversations to give us a more agile, actionable plan. So those questions were something like, what are our treatment prioritizations? What are our treatment methods? And what are our restoration options? And that really kicked us off in our group of stakeholders, a bunch of great conversations about mapping and prioritizing. And I'm sure some of them are in the audience rolling their eyes because we had lots of meetings about this and how difficult it was to come up with, to agree with each other on, what is the perfect map to predict cheatgrass here and how do we prioritize treatment. And so we ended up compromising a bit on a 3-tiered prioritization treatment or prioritization program. And it's not perfect, but this is kind of where we're settling at the moment. So if you're familiar, most of you are, with the Defend the Core philosophy, tier one in this proposed program is, focusing on those isolated, small, mild infestations to really knock them back. Well, that works, but not everyone agrees. A lot of folks want to focus on the bigger infestations that are creeping close to high quality big game habitat or kind of coming close to Lex for Gunnison sage grouse. And that's very important given our, 90% of Gunnison sage grouse live in this basin. So that would be our tier two. And when I say moderate infestation, just a little context, again, our biggest infestations may be cover of like 15%. So we're not talking monocultures here. This is moderate means a little different here. And then there's another strong argument for continuing to treat that which we've already heavily invested in. And so balancing these three is a challenge. So when money is a little skim, like we're right now, we might focus on those pinch points where we can only do a little bit, 100 acres here or 100 acres there. Maybe when money's flush, we can treat tier one, tier two, and tier three. Maybe next year, after a very dry summer and cheatgrass pops up after some bare ground is exposed, we might have to focus on some of those moderate infestations. And I'd like to call out some other partners that are further afield because they've also helped us come up with a treatment prioritization model, specifically the USGS, with preset helping us determine where we should, invest our funding when we have it. And another thing that this framework has helped us identify is that we really need to be pursuing NEPA approval for some of the more effective treatment options. Other things I've been focusing on is pooling resources, so getting a little creative, working with all of our partners, creating agreements with my federal partners so that they're not going through the long bidding process, but I'm securing funding, I'm securing contracts, and I can, through those agreements, treat land. And then really spending a lot of time developing a pipeline for volunteers. We have a huge resource on the ground, and that's just our citizens and visitors. And we're starting the, long-term process of creating a restoration material adapted to this basin channel, and that will take some time, but we hope that that'll be an effective option if we do have those disturbances in the future. So just a caveat, so this QR code will take you to an application on your cell phone for cheat maps. So this is an app that was developed before my time, a couple years ago, but I've spent the last year working really hard to update it, to make it a little bit more effective. So the application itself just lets you take a photo of cheat maps and drop a point or a pin and, record a Latin long and tell me, here's cheatgrass. And this was a tool designed for visitors and locals and land managers to start a kind of on the ground effort to help figure out where cheatgrass is in Gunnison County. With an infestation that's kind of so low, sometimes it's really hard to use those wrap layers, particularly when we were relying on the 30-meter resolution to find it. So this was really helpful for ground truthing. But I'm excited because we spent a lot of time this year developing image recognition. So if you've ever used iNaturalist or Seek, it now can tell you if you are in fact looking at cheatgrass. Maybe not helpful for this group in this room, but really helpful for out-of-town guests. And then probably the most exciting thing is it now can record using an augmented reality tool in the app, an area. So you can actually draw a polygon around an infestation, record percent cover, and then on the back end, I can develop shape files to start to kind of pool those together and get an estimate of infestations. So we're really excited about some of those tools. And I'm running a little low on time, but, I've spent a lot of really early mornings of late surveying Lex and just remembering that this work is hard. Sometimes it feels challenging, but it's not hopeless because all of the leks I've been to the last few days have been completely free of cheatgrass, and that's why we're doing this. And I hope that, every effort we're putting in continues to allow these opportunities for future generations. So with that, I will say thank you, and please reach out if you have any questions.
Next, I will be turning it over to Nancy Fleming in the Bighorn Basin, and we're going to hear a little bit about her work.
Okay. All right. So, like Claire said, my name is Nancy Fleming, and I am the Wind River Bighorn Basin District Invasive Annual Grass Coordinator. And I will be sharing with you all how our approach and management is with invasive annual grasses in the Bighorn Basin. Well, there we go. Okay, so for starters, I was born and raised here in Wyoming, and the Wind River Range was in my backyard. I grew up learning to appreciate what makes this state so special. My grandpa ran cattle and bred quarter horses on the Wind River Reservation, and he was really the one who shaped who I am today. He taught me how to fly fish and how to hunt, and most importantly, he taught me that if the land takes care of you, you are obligated to take care of it in return. Now, as a new mother, I think a lot about these landscapes that I grew up in and how they will look for my daughter and the next generation. And that's why this work that we're doing right now matters so much. Before we get into the management, it's important to understand what makes the Bighorn Basin both unique and challenging. This basin is often described as an island where we are in a low elevation desert surrounded by mountains over 10,000 feet tall. This sharp contrast creates a distinct ecological boundary and influences how invasive annual grasses are moving across these landscapes. Even though we are surrounded by the alpine systems, the basin itself is a semi-arid and sometimes badland area with bunchgrass and sagebrush communities that, especially this year, are already stressed. That's what makes this system especially vulnerable to invasive annual grasses. So across this 5-county area, conditions vary a lot. Some places are heavily infested while others are still intact. That variability is why prioritization is so important. The key idea here is that we're not trying to treat every single acre, but instead we're using data, local knowledge from my partners, and collaboration to focus on acres that matter the most and where we can make the biggest difference. Imagine held a level 3 workshop in the Bighorn Basin in 2023, I believe. I was not there, but one key takeaway from major partners involved was that there was a need for dedicated coordination across the region. That recognition ultimately led to the creation of my coordination position. So when it comes to invasive annual grass work here in the Bighorn Basin, we don't have a single working group that's driving everything. Instead, we're looking at a basin-wide network of partners. This includes agencies like the BLM, the County Weed and Pest Programs, NRCS, Game and Fish, Forest Service, conservation districts, county-specific groups, IWJV, and private landowners, and Imagine. Each of these agencies bring different personal perspectives and sets of tools to the table. And really what connects us all is that shared goal of managing invasive annual grasses, but more importantly, improving how we're making decisions and how effective our management is. We do this by combining this immense local knowledge that we have and also pairing it with that data that helps us step back and look at the basin as a whole. A big part to making this work across such a large area is how we're staying connected. I like to say that invasive annual grass takes an army, so we hold regular basin-wide meetings where partners come together to share resources, data, agency updates, and lessons learned. I stay in very close contact with my weed and pest partners, BLM, NRCS, and game and fish partners. That steady flow of information is critical to keep everyone aligned and ensures that we aren't working within our own groups or agencies, but we're building off of each other's experiences in the field. And and where work is being done in the field. This level of coordination strengthens cross-boundary collaboration, which has helped us secure additional funding and resources for projects, and it's also improved our post-fire planning and response as partners have recognized the importance and value of coming together in person to share information and coordinating what resources are out there following major wildfires. In the end, this has really improved our decision making and has ensured that our treatments are reflecting local priorities rather than a one size fits all. As we know, invasive annual grasses aren't just a plant problem, they affect the entire system. They are reducing our wildlife habitat, they're impacting grazing productivity, and they're increasing fire risk across our landscapes. At the heart of the Bighorn Basin Network, it's really about keeping Wyoming what it is best, and that is healthy working lands and rangelands that are supporting our wildlife, our ranching, and our local communities for generations. The first step to our process is the pen and paper. So we get together and we sit down around a table and we discuss local knowledge, we have maps, and we bring together these different GIS layers, things like critical wildlife range, sagebrush integrity, and cheatgrass cover predictions. And with that, we also, like I said, bring that combined partner knowledge of what folks are seeing on the ground. This partner knowledge is huge in helping us understand different land uses and different land values on the ground by county. Since it is such a large area we are covering, having those folks there is really making that effort worthwhile. This helps us highlight priority areas across the basin intentionally. These aren't just random selections we're making. We're truly identifying areas that both have ecological value and practical value, places where the management is not only needed, but also likely most effective. And after we have these discussions, we all go out into the field and we ground truth our intended projects just to make sure that these areas are lining up with kind of what we came to with the pen and paper stage, and making sure that they align with the treatments that we have in mind for them. Once our sites are selected, these projects are decided and sites are selected, we then provide this monitoring support to our partners. Before any treatment happens, we are collecting baseline data. We perform an ocular cover estimate that involves invasive annual grass species specific cover, perennial grass cover, sagebrush cover, and bare ground cover. And we're also taking note of noxious weeds. We take a picture, and I guess I should start by how this process starts is we have these shape files or projects downloaded onto a tablet. We then enter the project area and we start by taking a picture. We drop a GPS pinpoint that saves our lat and long, and then we take this cover estimate survey. We're dropping points every 200 to 500 feet, depending on what this landscape looks like. This is really helping our managers get inventory of what the total landscape looks like pre-treatment. And even if projects aren't being treated right away, for example, last year we ran into some issues where we weren't able to get as many projects on the ground due to funds, but that didn't stop us from getting out into these priority sites and getting that inventory. And with fires becoming no stranger to the Bighorn Basin, this inventory is extremely useful and helpful in a worst case scenario. We're also providing partners clipping and weighing data on treated and untreated areas, which looks like pounds per acre production of invasive annual grasses compared to pounds per acre production of perennial grasses. This is helping us tell a more meaningful story, especially for the producers, because we're talking about what they're saving through management. This isn't just numbers on a page. It really is about keeping these landscapes productive for families, operations, and future generations. And more importantly, or just as importantly, this is setting up another measure to see how our treatments are actually working over time. Another important piece to the work that we've been doing here in the basin is the demonstration plots. We maintain these on public lands So partners, producers, and public alike can all go out and see what these different herbicide treatments look like on the ground in the Bighorn Basin. We have 5 demonstration plots located in 3 counties in a range of precipitation, soil, and plant communities. Our focus was finding areas that had invasive annual grass presence, but also had a strong recovery potential. We also highlighted areas that had bunchgrass species because some of my partners were really curious in knowing different herbicide effects on certain bunchgrass species. So this has been very useful because we're not just talking about results. It's a lot more powerful to actually take folks out and see these results by side in real life conditions. These plots have created opportunities of shared learning, and they're helping reinforce what's working and what's not working here in the Bighorn Basin. And ultimately, they're really giving people more confidence to make more informed management decisions, and it's building trust within our private landowners. Once we have these results, the next step is making that information useful and accessible. So we are turning this data into simple, easy to read maps that clearly show what's happening on the ground. These products then get shared with my partners, who then share them with their network of partners and landowners and producers. This process is really important because it's truly building awareness, it's supporting better conversations, and it's helping everyone see the impact of the work that's happening here in the basin with invasive annual grasses. Instead of just talking about the treatments that we're doing, we're really showing the results in a way that people can understand and use. The data, again, we're collecting is truly driving where, what, and how this work will meet the ground and what we are prioritizing. We focus on areas on high recovery that have high recovery potential, and we're also learning and defending what we consider our cores here in the basin. So some key takeaways here is the boots on the ground data that we have gathered, whether that's the monitoring, the clipping and weighing, the demonstration plots. These are all helping us build trust, and it's giving us the evidence that we need. Using data from the Bighorn Basin specifically is ensuring that these decisions are based on the realities of our landscapes and not other states or regions. Every place has its own unique challenges, and knowing the Bighorn Basins is extremely critical to have positive work. Through this network, we've also gained additional invasive annual grass research that's happening beyond our data collection, and that's providing additional insights for management in highly invaded sites in the Bighorn Basin. In a large landscape, prioritization isn't just optional, it's essential. Focusing on key areas saves time, money, and resources while ensuring that our efforts have the biggest impact. Together, these lessons have shown that solid data, local engagement, and smart prioritization are driving the success of this network. As we wrap up, the key takeaways are simple but powerful. First, measure outcomes on the ground. Know what's actually happening and not just hope. It will happen. Second, invest in local research and demonstration. Seeing these treatments in action helps everyone learn and make better choices. And third, share the learning across boundaries between agencies, partners, and landowners alike so that we're all improving year to year. We've entered into year 3 of this work. I started in 2024. So we're still learning. We're actually going out into the field to collect post-monitoring data this year. So we'll actually get to compare those pre and post sites and how effective that herbicide and treatment was, seeing if there's non-target damage, just answering some of those questions for our partners. And again, we don't have all the answers, but even at this early stage, this work has proven extremely valuable to my partners and just the work that we're getting done here in the Bighorn Basin. So in the basin, we're not just treating invasive annual grasses, we're building a system that makes better decisions every single year so that my daughter and any other children can grow up in these same Wyoming landscapes that we value so much today. Thank you for the time to share what we're doing here, and I think we'll do questions like Claire said there at the end.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy. I did put, for those of you who are interested in learning more about what Nancy does, there are 2 articles that were written about her. So you can find those in the chat as well. Next, we're going to turn it over to our final speaker of the land management section. We're going to hear from Connor White, who is based up in Boise, Idaho. And we actually he's actually our most recent level 3 that we had up in Boise last month. So go ahead, Connor.
Right on. Is that screen showing up and my volume okay?
Yep, you're perfect.
Right on. Well, yeah, some good talks today. Appreciate Imagine having me on. I'm the Bosch project coordinator for Pheasants Forever here in Southwest Idaho. And the photo here, I titled my talk Doubling Down on Prior Success that we've had in Southwest Idaho. The photo in the background is a little bit of our Bosch project. That's Bruno Waihi Sage Grouse Habitat Project, and that'll kind of be featured a little bit throughout the talk, and the title kind of gives away what we're thinking of doing with annual grasses. But just a little bit on the geography of where we're at, like Southern Idaho is a pretty big place, but we're talking about Southwest Idaho, right? It's the Boise District, BLM, and you can see on the map on the left there that the majority landowner for most of our rangeland areas in this whole region, really, like Southeast Oregon, Southern Idaho, Northern Nevada, is all the BLM. And then this map here on the right-hand side of this screen just shows you, some previous fuels treatments that have happened in the last decade or so. And just take note of most all of those are south of the Snake River. And our group, I might be missing a few folks from our group here. It's probably not a comprehensive list. But we have some of the usual players, the feds, BLM, Fish and Wildlife, NRCS, some state level entities, Fish and Game, Department of Lands, and then some NGOs, PF, and then a couple others as well. And our group has been working together for probably the better part of a decade now. So I came into this position, with an already strong partnership. And really, the group got started with juniper removal, which really started through SGI way back in 2010. And that was mainly, for private lands, state lands focused. But then the BLM had always kind of cut juniper as well, but it was kind of on a smaller scale, not really with a comprehensive plan to address the problem at the scale of which it was occurring. So everyone really wanted a better approach from the BLM. So they went through with an EIS and authorized 617,000 acres of conifer removal in February of 2019. And then once you approve that many acres, they kind of realized that a coordinator was needed. So that is yours truly. And I was hired in 2020. And kind of I view my roles as just like keeping, the partners informed on what we're doing, do an annual project report that gets posted every year, and then as well as just scheduling meetings and tours about the project. The photo here is from a tour last fall that we gave to some NIFWIF folks. And I also route as much outside grant funding to Bosch as I can through Pheasants Forever. And really, I'd also just like to call out that the timing for how Bosch rolled out really couldn't have been better. We were just really hitting our stride when the bipartisan infrastructure law dollars came through, and that's actually funded all of Bosch since 2022. And you can see the acreage, we're over 270,000. We'll be over halfway through the project after 2026. And our group is, we're in weekly communication on whether it's Bosch, Mesic restoration, or annual grass stuff. We're just talking to each other all the time. But so I like this slide quite a bit. It's like we're really just crushing it, knocking it out of the park on conifer. So take a look in this photo. All this juniper cutting. It's like woohoo, sage grouse are going to be happy. But then look in the foreground and all the interspaces in that low sage. It's just completely loaded with annual grasses. So we're getting a win out there. But we need to take it to the next level if we really want to push things back to where it needs to be ecologically. And through the Inflation Reduction Act, Southern Idaho, I guess the Snake Plain area, got a large chunk of dollars for annual grass work in our part of the state. So we just recently had our level 3 workshop just about a month ago on how we're going to think about deploying those resources in a strategic way. And we have done some smaller scale stuff. I'll get into that a little bit in the next few slides on state and private using the Mazapic and Dazaflam combination. But I want to talk a little bit about landscape context on this slide. So when we looked at it on our level 3 workshop, we just have this enormous range of variability across our Boise district BLM. I would say from literally the most burned place on planet Earth, which is Mountain Home, Idaho, just east of Boise, to some of our best of the best, sagebrush habitat that's further south in the Owyhees and that really hasn't burned since we've been keeping track of those things, and pretty much everything in between that. So it's kind of a smorgasbord out there. And you can kind of see that on these new tools that we have available to us. So on the left portion, I have a screenshot of the sagebrush conservation design with a little bit of our 2 field offices for the Owyhees there. And a lot of you are familiar with that. You heard talk earlier in the day. And then in the middle is a modified layer of the threat-based ecostate maps, which comes out of Oregon State. And then you also heard earlier this morning about the invasion severity index, which is that screenshot there on the right. So the last 2, the ecostates and the ISI, at least use that new 10-meter RAP data, which that's been extremely valuable just in the last month since we've had our level 3. Those 2 layers have been very valuable. But you can kind of see some common themes here, start to emerge on all 3 of these. Is like where the sagebrush conservation design is showing a large blob of core sagebrush area, the ecostate layer is showing shrub and perennial grass, and the ISI is showing low levels of invasion, and the inverse for the Snake River Plain. So, and spoiler alert, if you do have a level 3 workshop, Claire and Brian usually just sit up there and just like, well, what do you think about this? So I'll ask you guys, where do you think our group should be working? And I guess as a spoiler for the next slide, I'll show you a little bit of where we've worked at on Bosch in relation to the sagebrush conservation design, and you guys can give us a grade and see how we've done so far on Bosch. So I don't think this looks too bad, really. It's like the completed treatments for Bosch are in green. And most of the cutting, it's been in either core or growth. There's some other rangelands area, but a lot of that is like, yeah, we might have removed 1 threat, but there's still the annual grass threat. So it might be artificially low just because it had multiple threats going on. And the other thing I'd like to call out is Bosch has already been prioritized from a grouse perspective. So it gave us really a great starting point to work off of. But we still wanted to go through the level 3 workshop, just like, well, what about some of these other areas that aren't in Bosch? Is that important or not? So it's like, because not every area is created equal, right? That slide from a few pictures back where all those cut trees, and then it's just absolutely loaded with annual grasses. It's like, is that where we need to be working or not? So that's a little bit of what we talked about in the level 3 workshop. But the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the invasion actually looks like. So this is the same map. I just have Bosch treatments on the map on the right. This is, again, just showing the eco states. And you can see we've largely, again, just showing that we've largely worked in areas that are in pretty good condition so far. And then on the map on the left, I have a blue arrow, and that is ecologically representing the spread of Medusa Head from west to east along that, what we call the Flint Creek Road corridor. The gold star, we got us a gold star. That represents about where Fish and Game has discovered some new leks, we think, as a result of our Bosch juniper cutting. It's like 6 potential new leks, totaling nearly 100 birds, about 5 or 6 years after treatment, which is great, but you still see there's annual grass threats nearby. And then the black star represents Big and Little Jack's wilderness areas where restoration was limited at the time after a wildfire due to wilderness constraints. So there's a lot of cheatgrass in this area. I think somebody in our Level 3 meeting called it absolute trash out there in portions of it because it is just solid cheatgrass. But in that area, it's important to note that we have 4 species of big game that use that area primarily as a wintering range. So we have pronghorn, we have elk, we have deer that move through there, as well as having bighorn sheep, which they recently did a translocation into. So knowing a little bit of that information, again, what do you guys think we should be doing? And I guess to get right to what we kind of came up with is a lot of it was just doubling down on where we've had prior success within Bosch. And that was for a couple reasons. It's been a pretty highly promoted and well-known project, but what we're seeing on the ground, as well as backed up by the relevant science, is that you do see a bump in annual grasses after any kind of conifer treatment, right? That's a disturbance, whether it's cutting or if you follow it up with some prescribed burning, you do see a bump in annual grasses. It does go down after a while, but the pre-treatment, it's higher than pre-treatment levels, not by a lot, but it is noticeable. And our group felt that it was just important to, number one, acknowledge that, while then at the same time being able to message to landowners, permittees, as well as just the general public that, hey, we're not just creating another problem and walking away from it here. We're gonna address this. So the 3 numbers on the screen here, I'm just going to go into a bit more detail on what we're hoping to do in each area because the strategy is different in each area. So for the Flint Road area, we're pretty much looking to contain Medusa Head from moving further east. And as you see there in the black polygons, that's about 6,000 acres that we did on state and private land with imazapic and dazaflam combination treatments in 2023 and 2024. So we intend to build that out just to the west a little bit and try to hold the line, from Medusa Head getting further east into areas that are in better condition. And I say we might be able to push it back further. You see where I have a question mark there, kind of in between Flint and South Mountain roads. We're not quite sure on that yet, but at a minimum, we might be just fine doing that with additional site visits. But for right now, I think we're going to look at some test plots out in that area at a minimum before we go all in on stuff that's a little more heavily invaded. Here is a photo from some of the treatment areas on state and private. So on the left, pre-treatment fall of 2023. On the right, post-treatment year 2 from 2025. And what I love in this photo is just that low sagebrush right there, center of both photos. We heard a little bit about mule deer. I was like, which shrub would you rather be browsing on if you're the mule deer? It's like the one that actually got all the water and nutrient resources it needs so that it can actually grow. That one on the right. Our second area here is our maintain area. Pretty classic, defend the core. If we see something that's starting to pop up, we're just going to go after it. I think a lot of our acres are going to be in this area. It's where a lot of our grouse are at. It's heavily where all of our Bosch treatments are at. And it's where the new Lex were found. A lot of times we're seeing the invasions come in south and west facing slopes, which is not unexpected. This ranges anywhere from 5,000 to 5,800 feet elevation, probably a mix of some Medusa Head and as well as some cheatgrass. I actually don't have a great photo of this area because it turns out I don't take as many photos of the good areas as some of the areas that are a problem. So we'll jump straight over to our area 3, which is Big and Little Jacks Creek wilderness areas. So yeah, pretty poor conditions out here. The wildfire was in 2012. This screen grab is from a 3-year average from 2023, 24, and 25. So as we know, these systems just do not really recover well if you just leave them alone out there. This has been well over a decade, and it's still just pretty much solid cheatgrass. But again, it's a very important big game winter area out here for 4 species, which is I don't feel like you don't see that too very terribly often. So the elk and the sheep are probably all right. They like to eat grass as it is, but without the shrubs, the deer and the antelope could probably be doing a little bit better. So in this area, we're just realistically looking at probably just like plain flying on a imazapic which should be fairly cheap, and then trying to do a follow-up seeding the following winter just to get more brush out there for the deer and the antelope, with a reasonable expectation that we're not trying to totally convert this site. We're just trying to help, a known area of big game winter range. Here, I didn't have a great photo of this, but I had a photo of a friend when I was hunting chukars there a year or two ago. In the foreground, you can just see how much that's obviously unburned, but just how much cheatgrass is in the inner space. And then kind of in the upper, like way up there on the horizon, and the upper right part of the photo, that is in the burn, and you can see just fields of yellow grass as far as you can see. And most of it's cheatgrass. You do get into some perennial grasses as you go up in elevation, but it's mostly just cheatgrass. And I threw in one more slide here at the end that we did talk about in our level 3 workshop. We have a network of fuel breaks throughout quite a bit of our district. Honestly, we have Paradigm fuel breaks, Soda fuel breaks, and then some of the tri-state fuel breaks as well. And we felt it was really important where it made sense. Obviously those lower elevation ones, you want to be careful about which ones you spray or not, so you don't have additional herbaceous weeds popping up. But these ones that are out, fuel breaks in sagebrush country, it's like, spray those fuel breaks, man. Something we haven't really done to date that we will be doing this fall. A little bit on the challenges. I would say we've had some of the usual challenges on our treatments on state and private up to this point, mostly with indaziflam, striping and swath width, and getting the full rate to the ground. That's been promoted as being extremely important, and we've been no exception or poster child to that. And you can see that in that photo. I took that about 10 days ago from some stuff from last fall, and that's a major issue in my book. But looking at it now, it's like I should have identified that on the pattern test, but I just didn't have the knowledge and experience on how to fully understand those pattern test reports at the time. And you're trying to hurry, get stuff on the ground because of deadlines, government shutdowns, everything else. So it's not ideal, but I would much rather see this and learn from this on a 930 acre project as opposed to when we really ramp stuff up this fall and when we're looking at like 30 or 40,000 acres of treatment. So there might be I would say an opportunity for additional training either from industry or Imagine on understanding a pattern test, because that was something I was lacking even just last fall. As far as what's next for our group, this is a photo from Claire giving us our marching orders the morning of. I think Jeremy took this photo. We've got a slug of money right now, and so we're trying to go as fast as we can because that money's in an agreement that expires in a couple years. So we have this fall, next fall, and my biggest takeaway from our level 3 workshop was that it just helped with a facilitated discussion, right? Like we had a robust partners group. We meet regularly, but then having Claire and Brian essentially kind of draw the answers out of us, it was very helpful. And I don't think we had any huge disagreements or big surprises that came out of it, but just a facilitated discussion through the level 3 was definitely valuable. So that is all the slides I had, and I will stop sharing.
Great. Thank you, Connor. All right. So if you have questions for our speakers, our first one is actually to Connor. In the maintain triangle to mudflats area, I'm curious about the practicality of seeking and destroy strategy. Is this mostly opportunistic? Are you relying on landowners and BLM staff reports as they bump into patches of invasives, or are these formal contracts or are there formal contracts to have folks survey key portions of these areas?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. And I'm fairly confident in these new 10-meter layers to give us a pretty good baseline of what's there or not. Plus, I've been out in the field, and our partners have as well. We're just out there all the time for Bosch stuff. So a lot of it is like we've already, we're doing field checks on the contractors when they're cutting juniper. My mind is always, I'm like looking at the creeks for mesic restoration, or I'm looking at uplands like, well, there's a lot of annual grass over there, or there's a little bit coming in on that south-facing slope. So I'm always kind of watching for that stuff as we're out there cutting trees because it takes weeks and weeks to cut 30,000, 40,000 acres of conifer. So we do feel it gets to be quite a grind, honestly. But
Mhm.
and then yeah, our partners are out there as well. I oftentimes call it, if I see like a mesic area that needs fixed or something else, the conservation handoff. It's just like, well, I see this, I don't have time to deal with it, but I'm going to give it to our fish and game guy, so he might have some time to do that. And I think collectively we just have enough information on a lot of that. I say seek and destroy. Obviously, we're not going to get everything, but between the 10-meter and then our local knowledge, I feel like we're in a pretty good spot.
Nice, thank you. Our next question, which I might actually be able to answer, are there any ways to see detailed meeting notes, lists of facilitator questions for that level 3 workshop to guide similar discussions in other landscapes? We don't have we don't have a specific set of questions, but I could definitely create something and make it shareable for all of you guys as participants. I will say, creating a user got like we're kind of trying to come up with what are the common questions in our core team to try to then create like a visual for it, to eventually have come out for like land managers. So that might be an option. Um, and then this one is for Sarah. Is sorry if I missed it, but are you not able to use newly adapted categorical exclusion for NEPA compliance?
No, not at this time. I'm not sure. I'm copying, found on that. I'm copying to see if I can find out why not. So we're excluded from using indaziflam on BLM, as well as aerial spraying on BLM and US Forest Service. Those are the two big ones that we're working on, pushing through. Aerial spraying and indaziflam on BLM is pending, but it's been pending for about 5 years. So every 6 months, I'm told it's coming. So hopefully it will be coming. I'm getting more confident that it will be approved, because I think that that's a really big tool that we're just missing out in this basin, especially because we're at the point where indaziflam could be really effective because we have perennials. But I'll look into that and see. As for the Forest Service, they just have a lot less cheatgrass on their land, and I don't see them starting the NEPA process. We're just at a capacity stop right there. There's unwilling to do any kind of NEPA start process at the moment. So I'll just continue to fight the fight, and hopefully we'll get there in the next couple of years.
Great, thank you. All right, our last question is to all of our speakers. What an inspiring group of presentations. Thank you all. I'd be interested in hearing your broad reflections on lessons learned, or advice to others for how to work most effectively with our local communities on invasive annual grasses. So that is to all three of you guys.
I guess I can go first. I'd say a lot of times they're the ones coming to us. Like they've been clamoring for this like for a long time, I would say. So just being able to work through some of it. I like to maybe add a little bit to the previous question. Like 'cause the record of decision for the programmatic VEG-A for BLM is approved nationwide, but then you need just like step down NEPA if you have a local document. So like for the Boise District BLM, we got that through last year. So we will be doing indaziflam on BLM this fall. That's not the case for every BLM district. But we could possibly share that information on how Boise District wrote theirs if you're interested, Sarah, or others. Perhaps it's posted somewhere on ePlanning. But yeah, a lot of times, I mean, the landowners and permittees, they see it way more than we do because they're out there on the daily. And thus far, in my opinion, they've been the ones coming to us and just like, hey, you guys really need to do something about this. So in my mind, I've kind of been like telling our guys like, hey, we're going to try to do as much conifer as we can so that then we can turn our attention towards annual grass as soon as we can after that.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. So, like I said, still relatively fresh to the position, but we have found that these demonstration plots and the in the field learning have been very useful for landowners to get them out in the field with other agency partners to have those discussions and see the results for themselves. And it's been, it's kind of taken off. This summer, we're going to be very busy with doing a lot of outreach and showcasing those. So I'm excited to have those conversations. And that's, I guess, what I have for that.
Yeah, lesson learned. I'm an outsider, and so I'm not from Gunnison, and I came in about 15 months ago, and it's been very helpful to listen first, like the 2 ears, one mouth rule, to kind of learn as much, but also to bring an outsider's perspective to an isolated, insulated valley, to talk about new treatment options. For example, aerial spraying is, not a popular thing for everyone here, but talking about it and demonstrating how it works. And I mean, one day we'll get demonstration plots. We'll get there. So yeah, some lessons learned and continued to be learned. Yeah. Thanks again for everyone's attention.